Good evening. You're watching the main news on HKIBC. I'm Johanna. Here's a look at tonight's top stories. Russia attacks Ukraine, triggering panic and condemnation. In Hong Kong, a 9-year-old boy dies from COVID as new cases jump to over 8,700. And the vaccine pass policy takes effect today, barring those who have not had jabs from many places. Dozens of Russian and Ukrainian soldiers were reportedly killed as Moscow launched a military operation, which Kyiv described as a full-scale invasion. But Russia denied that it is trying to occupy Ukraine, which declared martial law and cut diplomatic ties with its nuclear-armed neighbor. Sarah Wang reports.
After weeks of speculation, Europe is on the brink of possibly the worst conflict since the Second World War. Ukrainians woke up to the sound of shelling and explosions. Their foreign minister called it a full-scale invasion by neighboring Russia. President Vladimir Putin ordered a special military operation in eastern Ukraine, prompting an evacuation of the Luhansk area, held by pro-Moscow rebels. The Russian leader said he was only heeding calls for help from separatists in the Donbass region and accused Ukrainian government troops of stirring up trouble. Putin denied that he wants to occupy his neighbor, but urged Ukrainian soldiers to surrender. He also warned of an immediate response if the West retaliates against this move. Russian troops and vehicles were seen entering Ukraine from Belarus and from the annexed Crimean Peninsula in the south. The Kremlin denied targeting Ukrainian cities or civilians, only military infrastructure with high-precision weapons. There was panic in the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, as air sirens blared. Explosions were heard in cities outside Donbass, which Russia now recognizes as independent. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky declared martial law and urges compatriots to stay home. But his plea fell on deaf ears as traffic jams clogged the capital, where some people sought shelter in metro stations. Kyiv implored the international community to send military equipment and humanitarian aid. Meanwhile, claims by Ukrainian forces of shooting down several Russian aircraft in Luhansk were denied by Moscow, which said it had degraded Ukraine's air defenses. Amid a worsening situation, Ukraine closed its airspace to civilian flights, while airports in southern Russia restricted operations. The Chinese embassy in Kyiv told its nationals to stay indoors and put Chinese flags on their cars for safety. Sarah Wang, HKIBC.
At the United Nations, Ukraine demanded devastating sanctions against Russia. The United States spearheaded Western condemnation of Moscow and vowed to respond with full-scale economic penalties. Here's Sarah Wang again.
Как могу быть нацистом я?
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who's facing the biggest crisis of his short political career, has urged the international community to rally behind him. The United Nations Security Council held an emergency meeting as Kyiv demanded a decisive response from world leaders. Russian envoy Vasily Nembenzia denied that Moscow's military actions constituted a war.
It's too late, my dear colleagues, to speak.
His Ukrainian counterpart, Sergei Kieslizia, said it was too late to de-escalate and demanded the Russian to relinquish his role as council president. China urged calm and rationality while refraining from condemning its longtime ally. The UN chief began the meeting with an appeal.
I have only one thing to say from the bottom of my heart. President Putin, stop your troops from attacking the Ukraine. Give peace a chance. Too many people have already died.
NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg denounced Russia, saying countless civilian lives were in danger. He vowed to do all it takes to defend allies of the Western Defense Alliance. U.S. President Joe Biden, who spoke to Zelensky as the crisis deepened, vowed to respond with severe sanctions over Russia's unprovoked and unjustified incursion. But Washington is not sending combat troops to Ukraine, which is not a NATO member. The European Union is preparing a massive package of sanctions that is aimed to dagger Russia's financing and modernizing capabilities. Brussels warned of more punishment to come in the following days, which in the first could target Putin himself. Sarah Wong, HKIBC.
Turning to local news, a 9-year-old boy who tested positive for COVID has died in hospital after collapsing at home. His death came as daily infections in Hong Kong rose to a new high. Winna Wong reports.
With a record 8,795 local cases today, Hong Kong's tally in the fifth COVID wave has exceeded 60,000. According to a University of Hong Kong study, the reproductive rate of this wave has been 3.3, meaning one infected patient has, on average, passed it on to 3.3 other people. Infections have not reached their peak yet, according to Undersecretary for Food and Health, Choi Tak-yi. As authorities push for more eligible children to get vaccinated, they announced today the death of a 9-year-old boy. The child, who suffers from a chronic genetic disease, collapsed at home last night. An ambulance took him to the United Christian Hospital, where doctors tried to resuscitate him, but he died just after 7 a.m. Officials say the COVID tests of the unvaccinated boy came back positive. A coroner will look into the exact cause of his death. 50 other people died from COVID over the past 24 hours. All of them were above 50 years old, and most were over 80. 17 more deaths from earlier this week were added to the tally. Meanwhile, the government announced that the entire Tin Shui Wai Hospital will be converted into a COVID-dedicated facility. The ambulance and emergency department will continue to take in urgent non-COVID cases, but non-emergency patients will be diverted to other hospitals, while arrangements will be made to treat existing patients elsewhere. Winna Wong, HKIBC.
The government has invoked an emergency law to enlist mainland doctors and nurses in Hong Kong's battle against COVID. The arriving medical personnel will not need a license or registration.
In its bid to rein in the fifth COVID wave, the Hong Kong government is waiving licensing and registration requirements for mainland personnel who come to lend a hand. They include people who will help construct hospitals and isolation facilities, as well as healthcare professionals. Chief Executive Carrie Lam invoked the Emergency Regulations Ordinance yesterday, but a statement was issued only this morning. It said the regulation provided a legal framework so that Hong Kong could get assistance from the mainland effectively and flexibly. Chief Secretary John Lee will be empowered to exempt certain people and projects from various requirements, including licenses, permits, and registration. The move comes as Hong Kong prepares for massive operations that will require large numbers of healthcare and other professionals. 2 days ago, Lam pledged to provide over 50,000 new isolation units and a new hospital in the Lok Ma Chau Loop. She also said Hong Kongers will need to be tested 3 times next month, adding that the task would not be possible without mainland help.
The wife of Civil Service Secretary Patrick Nip has tested positive for COVID. She got a positive result in a rapid test this morning and was confirmed with the virus after a deep throat saliva test. Nip, who is in charge of the vaccination drive, and other family members tested negative, but as close contacts, they must isolate at home for 14 days. Nip will work from home during that period. The vaccine pass policy took effect today, barring unvaccinated people from premises such as restaurants. As Hong Kongers began adapting to the new normal, elderly people complained that the system is too complicated, while restaurants were worried about losing business. Chloe Feng reports.
On the first day of the vaccine pass policy, some people appeared confused about the procedures, while some encountered difficulty entering premises such as restaurants. People have to scan the Leave Home Safe app then showed their vaccination or exemption records to restaurant staff for a second scan before getting a seat. Authorities described it as a move that can kill two birds with one stone. But there were some hitches. In this case, the scan failed. But the woman was allowed in after showing her inoculation status. This restaurant owner complained that the government's guidance was not clear and that 90% of his customers were unhappy with the procedures. But staff at another restaurant said it wasn't that hard. A beep from the equipment and a blue color code on the phone prove that a customer has been vaccinated. Still, the restaurant worker admitted that business has dropped because senior citizens have no phones or have not had a jab. At Maritime Square in Tingyi, the QR codes of the Leave Home Safe are plastered everywhere near the entrance. But this woman was uncertain about the procedure and was worried that she would get it wrong. The authorities said the new measure can help them keep track of the spread of the virus. Chloe Fong, HKIBC.
National Security Police have arrested 2 managers of a bubble tea shop in Mongkok. Officers were seen at the store in Argyle Center this evening. Sources say 2 women in their 20s have been charged with sedition for running a smear campaign against the government's anti-epidemic work. They are accused of using social media to call on people to flout social distancing rules. Police also obtained a warrant to search their homes and the Mongkok shop. And coming up after the break. The Russian attack on Ukraine sends oil prices soaring and hits Hong Kong stocks.